are showing. I'll pack up my boots and be going back.
So there we go. It is the last day of July in 2017. Welcome to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people with a look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation and simulcast on the Gwe, CKWE in Tyendinaga. We are also rebroadcast on the Gwe and also on Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, and Indigenous Resistance Radio. You can also listen to the live stream of our audio, or when we're not live, a continuous loop of previous shows at www.ltnradionet.com. That's our page, our website for the media player that plays the show both live and, like I said, in the previous shows in a loop. I'm John Kane. I am the show's host and producer. I've got Matt back on the board after a little bit of a break.
Hiatus.
No, just a night off. Spending some time with your son.
Yeah, we
that's
went
always
straight
cool.
under Ashland.
All right, there you go. So we got Matt back on the board. I've got Ed Schindler in studio as our guest to weigh in. We got an interesting topic to talk about. And I've got Jake Proud behind the camera, behind the microphone. Or would that be in front? No, behind the microphone, I guess. Manning the cameras for our Facebook live stream and for the video that we will ultimately post on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, Let's Talk Native TV. And I encourage you to check out our YouTube channel. Subscribe. If you subscribe to the channel, then you'll get an email each week, or actually twice a week, when the shows are posted. It's a little bit different perspective. It's a separate camera than the camera we're using for the Facebook live stream, so it's just another way to again, to watch the show, to hear the show, to see what we're doing here. And it's also another place, because it is another format aside from the Facebook live stream. It's another place for you to weigh in. You can comment, and I don't know if people take that opportunity or take that again, do that. Take the chance to offer their comments on YouTube. But it's also another place to have to have some discourse. So by all means, do that. Look, we also have phone lines available, so you can not only weigh in with live comments during our Facebook live stream, or comments after the show has already aired via the Facebook stream that was live, or like I said, weighing in on the YouTube channel. We post the audio up on SoundCloud, so you can and of course we share that on Facebook and on Twitter and those places. So by all means, there's a lot of opportunity for you to weigh in. But we also have a phone number, so I want to give that number out. The number, if you want to call in to be a part of the conversation, perhaps you want to agree with something we said or disagree with something we said, or present something that we perhaps haven't considered or even thought to talk about. So the number is 855-967-0463. That's the number to call. You'll actually be calling the Gwe. You'll be calling CKWE in Tyendinaga, and they'll patch you through. We appreciate that service that the Gwe provides us. All right. Well, I guess one more thing. Our studio engineer is Kelly McMillan, and I want to thank her for the fine work that she's done. The opening song was Roots Are. Let's see.
My Roots Are Showing.
My Roots Are Showing. That's Crystal Shawanda from Dawn of a New Day. That's a CD that has done pretty well for her, and I'm a big fan of Crystal Shawanda. Actually, I saw her for the first time on the stage at Tootsie's, and if you've ever been to Nashville, you would know what Tootsie's and many of those other bar band venues are on Broadway in Nashville, and so that's where I got a chance to meet her, and been following her ever since. And she's won Juno Awards and done all kinds of great things. So she's gone on to have a very, very successful career. All right, so here it is. If you've seen the post on Facebook, I want to talk about what it would be like if we had our way. If we did have the state and the federal government, in fact, even foreign governments, recognize our sovereignty. Now, and what does that mean exactly? And a lot of people say, "Well, you guys aren't sovereign anymore. You're depending on federal funds and and state funds. And they talk about the health, the health care and that kind of stuff. But what happens in all that is what's being ignored is why the state and federal government pay that, and why do they offer anything to native territories? Well, how can they? I mean, because that's one of the arguments. Even in Hawaii, they say in Hawaii, the push is to make them a Indian tribe, and the reason they want to do that is because they're saying if we provide you services as Native Hawaiians, that's actually it may be a violation of equal opportunity issues and that kind of stuff. So. And I think what that ends up highlighting is why it is that the state or federal governments feel they have this trust responsibility, as they call it, and this obligation for certain dollars or programs or education dollars, healthcare dollars. Well, it's simple. They owe it. They owe it. I mean, and so when people say, "Well, you guys aren't dependent. You guys are dependent on the state and federal government," I argue, no, they're dependent on us, because if they don't fulfill their end of the obligation, and they have to do what? Release the land back? Give the land back to us? And and if they really did an assessment on what they have paid or continue to pay versus what they receive because of the land and the resources that they have, however they got to utilize them, whether it was fraud, which I would argue much of it was, or whether it was coercion or just bad negotiation on our part, perhaps not understanding what the federal government was really and the state governments were really doing to us. I mean, there's any way to slice and dice that. But I mean, I'm not necessarily looking to have the conversation about what reparations would look like. I mean, does the federal government, the state government, do they owe us? Well, we can make that argument, but that's not the argument I want to make today. In fact, I don't want to make an argument at all. I want to just discuss what it would be like, if, and I'm not just saying that we stop receiving any assistance from the state and federal government, but we can have that conversation too, because I mean, again, the myth is that we are totally somehow dependent, that we live in a welfare state. And, and of course, we're broadcasting here from the Seneca Nation territory. And the Seneca Nation does have its own resources, because of gaming revenue and other revenues that they get for, everything from some natural resources to again, any number of enterprises and revenue streams that they have. But that's the nation. And there's also the private sector. And of course, we do have a fairly, and I don't know, maybe vibrant isn't the right word, but we do have a developed private sector commercial trade here on our territories. And of course, most of it is focused around gas and cigarettes, but not exclusively so. There are other businesses that exist here. But my question is, if we had the states pushed back, if we had the federal government, if we had the other nations that recognized our sovereignty, so we could market our regulatory advantages to the full extent. I don't mean exploit them. I don't mean let's create toxic dumps on our territory. But if we could operate our commerce independent of frankly, the fight that we always have with the state and federal government, or independent of the oversight and the regulatory. I mean, regulatory issues, and what comes to mind there, obviously, is like IGRA, for instance. We get into this debate, and obviously, I've talked quite a bit about gaming here on this program because of the tensions that exist now between New York State and the Seneca Nation on the revenue sharing having come to an end, but when you consider gaming has been here far longer than the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. In fact, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act came into existence because it had nothing to do with us right here. As a matter of fact, it had to do with a native peoples who live in California, and they're called the Cabazons, or I don't know what the full name is, but people refer to them as the Cabazons. And the Cabazons were taken to court by the state of California for a high-stakes bingo operation that they had running. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled, and I want to say that it was like 1988, they ruled that the state could not prohibit the Cabazons from doing gaming, especially if they had gaming. If the state has gaming, then the states can't say that that a tribe or Native peoples can't do it. Again, I'm paraphrasing. That ruling. Obviously, many people looked at it as a victory because it kept the state from shutting down or from being able to impose its will on a native gaming enterprise in California. But there's a part of that ruling that isn't a win, because there is that sense that what the Supreme Court said is if the state has gaming, then Native people do gaming. So why would it matter whether the states have gaming? This is where I get back to, because and let me, I guess, go forward a little bit farther. So within that year after that ruling, the Cabazon ruling, the federal government scrambles to pass the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, IGRA. And what IGRA did was, and there was all kinds of lofty goals that IGRA was supposed to achieve. It was supposed to prevent the exploitation of Native people from both organized crime and, frankly, from states. It put regulations on what the states had to do and what they couldn't do. And one of the things that IGRA compelled the states to do was to negotiate. If a Native peoples wanted to do gaming, then the states were compelled to negotiate a compact. And but Florida, probably not the only state, but Florida fought it, and they said, well, a federal law can't force us to do something like this, and especially if the law was going to open up the states to lawsuit, because that violates, I think it's the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. It's one of them, maybe the 11th, I don't know, but it's one of those amendments that protects states' rights. And Florida was successful, so they got to sever that part of IGRA away. So it actually created an environment where you could argue that Native peoples in a given state didn't really have recourse if the state was non-cooperative. So again, IGRA does get passed, it gets challenged, and so what did IGRA do? What IGRA did was it created and I'll say clear, although there's certainly ambiguity, but it created a federal statute that recognized that Native gaming could operate legally under federal law. Now, we could argue that even without IGRA, since especially taking into consideration the Cabazon case, that if we were doing gaming, it was legal anyway. But again, you have this constant battle that we have with states and federal government over what we do with our commerce. So the reason so many Native territories jumped at the chance to operate gaming under this federal statute, even though, frankly, we weren't even a part of the negotiation for the most part. This statute got passed. That's pretty quick order for a Supreme Court ruling to happen, and within that calendar year, pass a federal statute of this significance. That's moving pretty fast by federal standards. But because they had a federal law, now vendors, the companies that we as Native gaming tribes or Native gaming folks would want to do business with. So whether it's vendors for machines or tables, table games, or frankly carpet, bars. I mean the hotel development, anything. Financiers. I mean, so looking for capital, looking for consultants, management agreements, all of that stuff. Now, because there was a federal statute, people could knock on our door knowing that they weren't going to have a legal fight on their hands. And frankly, it opened up the opportunity for gaming to take place that normally would have been more difficult because, frankly, people would have had to take a risk. And I would not saying that it was a risk, because I'm not saying they would be jeopardizing doing business with us in terms of that one-to-one relationship. But you have to keep in mind that many of these businesses have other clients in Vegas, Atlantic City. I mean, other territories. So they're concerned about their gaming licenses as it applies, from a federal standpoint or other states. The idea that they would jeopardize that relationship with some of those lawful organizations, those agencies that regulated gaming, if they were dealing with with an enterprise that was not regulated, that would give pause and reason for concern. So while I don't think IGRA was necessary for us to conduct gaming, even Class 3 gaming, and I still don't think it's necessary. What it does is it makes it easier for the vendors, for the lenders, for all of the people we do business with. So now, why does it make it easy? Because of this question mark. And so this is what I come back to. If the states and the federal government and other nations really recognize our sovereignty, IGRA wouldn't have been necessary. And in fact, I would argue that if we had that that respect, if our sovereignty was acknowledged, fully acknowledged, truly acknowledged, we would have tremendous opportunities on our territories. I mean, I had a caller in New York City suggest that Native people should demand reparations for the mistreatment. And of course, that's a conversation that some are having. I mean, you look on the Canadian side, there has been reparations for certain things under the Indian Act, but certainly the residential schools through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There has been some of that stuff. And I know that's a conversation that some think is worthwhile having. And I'm not saying that's not worth having. It's just not the conversation that I want to have. I'm not asking somebody to pay me for my misery. I'm saying just stop. Just stop doing what you're doing. So what this caller had said was, well, what if you got reparations in the form of the state or the federal governments assisting you in building industry on your territories? And I said, you know what? We don't need that help. What we need is them to leave us alone and to not fight us or raise any kind of questions about our ability to market our regulatory advantages. I mean, think about if we could do things on our territory, and we can, if we did things on our territory that couldn't be done in other places in New York State or the East Coast or the entire country, perhaps the continent. I don't know. I mean, think about medical tourism, and I'm not just talking about cannabis issues. I mean, I just mean in general, some stem cell processes that are not authorized in the United States. There are American doctors performing these procedures in other countries, in the Cayman Islands, in the Caribbean. American doctors, they're getting trained in this stuff, but they won't practice it here in the United States because it hasn't been approved yet. So, I mean, that's just an example. And there's other things. There's a whole lot of brain trust that leaves an area like Western New York with the universities that are here, not just UB, but all of there's some great schools out here, and most of the brain trust that is developed in this academic scenario does not see a market. They go to other countries. So if we could market our territories as an opportunity and a haven, and I'm not just saying for cheap labor or for environmental regulations that allow you to create toxic dumps, like I said earlier. But if you could streamline the process, I mean, think about, any country worth its own, or any company worth its own reputation, would not just exploit another country for, to make their lives miserable. We could argue whether they really do that or not, whether you're talking about Nikes being manufactured in some of these Asian countries where people are making, pennies a day or whatever it is. And, I had an example I talked about a couple of weeks ago when the microchip industry and semiconductors, when they learned that they were causing birth defects, IBM and some of the other major electronic companies said, oh, well, we're not going to manufacture them anymore. We're not going to jeopardize women because they were having this like 3 to 5 to 10 times the amount of miscarriages when they're pregnant. So what did they do? They just turned around and had these things manufactured in other countries. So they weren't being responsible. They were being responsible to the media cry that there would be in the United States. So that's not what I'm looking for. I'm saying, could we do some things on our territory? Could we utilize the regulatory advantages, the very things that stymie business, not just in New York State, but in the United States in general? And I'm not going to get into a whole litany of all of the claims that Trump makes about how difficult it is to do business in the United States. Look, there are needs. There are needs that every one of us has. The question is, are they going to be, are those needs going to be fulfilled or satisfied by, cheap labor in Asia, or the South Pacific or wherever else, because a multinational corporation has learned how to exploit that? Or can we say, look, from a geographical standpoint, we're close by, a given market. We don't have to be I'm not saying we need to turn our territories into a bastion for the global economy. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying, can we do some things on our territories that are meaningful to us, that we can say fulfill any cultural sensitivity, but could be very, very lucrative.
I remember 2 years ago we went to a program that showed housing, and it was small housing with.
It was the Solar Decathlon. It was in California. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing was that the students who made that housing didn't own that house; it belonged to the university that they were going to, and they didn't need it anyway because they couldn't build it. They couldn't build it because they didn't have building codes.
Well, and these were houses that were it was called the Solar Decathlon. They had to be built to compete against other universities and other countries, for that matter, that were building these homes to be energy efficient. They were grid connected, so they weren't off grid, but they had to be net zero or better. They had to be energy producing, and even though all of the products were off the shelf, that they incorporated in building structures, the designs were innovative, and whether these designs would have met a specific building code or not, what we had presented to them was that we are an immediate market for these things. Yeah. We could, and they were, of course, modular because these universities designed them at their schools, and they put them on a truck and send them to California for the competition. So that's an example. But, so the whole tiny homes movement and the whole idea of sustainable neighborhoods and housing developments, that kind of stuff. These are the things that we could employ on our territories, put to use on our territories, and be the model for off territory. So that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how do we, and we could do all this stuff if we had less interference from the federal government.
Right.
And especially if a company said, look, we would love to do something on your territory as a stepping stone to doing the same thing off your territory. And we're not saying, let's do something here so we can have the exclusive right that nobody can ever do it again. But this is the conversation that we need to have. We need to have a conversation on, if we had what we wanted, if we got what we wished for, what would our communities look like? And I'm not talking about the internals. This isn't about internal strife. This isn't about how we would govern or what we would do socially on our territory. I'm just saying, just from a practical comparison to the obstacles that we have today from the state and federal government versus what could be an alternative. And again, how could that not just be good for us, but how could it create a model so perhaps other regions, maybe development zones or neighborhoods, rural areas, maybe even some urban settings, and say, we see what the Senecas are doing, and we would like to try that, even if we only do it in a pilot program. Our territories could be the first shot across the bow in a pilot program, even if we didn't consider it a pilot program. Because when you consider the populations on our territories, we could do things on our territories that could be could demonstrate a microcosm of what is possible off our territories. That's not what we're doing today.
We were talking when I was in California. My roommate and I were talking about developing things on the territory and then taking them to other territories, whether it's Rosebud, whether it's Pine Ridge, whether it's down to Southwest or wherever, but basically go to territories that have the same opportunity and then not sell it, but basically just teach how to do it and basically share it.
Well, and not just people that have the same opportunity, but perhaps different opportunities.
Right.
That's the whole idea of trying to have native to native commerce where the needs are filled by perhaps by region. I mean, we
Right.
know that from an agricultural standpoint, there are some products that are going to grow better in other regions. So if we want white rice or wild rice, I should say, out of Minnesota, then perhaps we got white corn we could trade them. And these are the conversations that we're having. But when you get Sean John being pulled over for hauling a native product from one territory to another and being fined $1.3 million, these are the kinds of things that we need to make go away in order for us to really fulfill. Because let's face it, not everything we need to do has to be controversial, but it only takes the state. I mean, look at gaming, for instance. Look at the battle, the pitted battle we're in with New York State over them trying to literally extort money out of the Seneca Nation for revenue sharing when they have no right to it. There's no. I mean, in fact, under federal law, they are prohibited from squeezing money out of native gaming, and yet there you have it. So that's not even us doing something that is terribly controversial. It's not like we're growing cannabis in our backyard. Some territories are, and I realize that the court of public opinion is out on that. I think it's moving in a direction supporting it, but I mean when we talk about what's happening in Tyendinaga, I think the things that are high end and that have huge margins are always going to be the things that we push. Whether it's gas or gaming, the cigarettes, or in the case of some native territories that are pushing this cannabis issue, but it doesn't have to always be that way. There are some things that just gaining. I mean, I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I said, you know what? Look at the self-storage industry. Look how prevalent that is, and look how many places have these. Some big, some small. Think about if that is profitable in a place that pays property taxes, and it has building codes and permitting processes, and the cost for doing everything from power to everything else is higher off our territories, then what would 10 or 20% more operating margin? How profitable would that be? So what I'm saying is, it's not just the big items. It's not just the heavy front end items. I think that we could look at any variety of economic development opportunities simply by using, heck, even if it is only a 10% operating margin advantage, that's still a big margin, especially if you're talking about something that's already profitable off our territories or that has yet to be developed. It'd be easier to almost incubate some of these things on our territories, get the bugs out, get something that a finished product, a marketable product, and take it from territory to territory and then off territory. All right, hey, we're at the bottom of the hour. I know I talked about a mile a minute there in 30 minutes. It's kind of what I do. But let's take a break. And what are we going to go to break on here?
Murray Porter, That Man Was Me.
That Man Was Me, Murray Porter. All right, we'll be back in a minute.
She gave me the world, and the universe agreed. She gave me a heart, that's all that I need. She was my best friend, but I couldn't see. She needed a good man. That man was me. I wasn't thinking, I was a fool. She was right there beside me, but I was still cold. It's almost too late when I realized what I had, what I was all that I need. She was my best friend, but I couldn't see she needed a good man. That man was me. We both knew it, but we weren't free. We both had commitments, but love is meant to be. See,
All right. Hey, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Look, I want to thank our sponsors, Ross and Holly John, and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises. Folks like Robert Delamonte, Tuscarora Woodworks, good friends like Ed Schindler here in studio who contribute to the show. Friends like Tracy Brown, Cynthia Trice, Scott Snyder, Neville Spring, Sugar Montour, and many others who've helped the program in the past. I appreciate it all. It helps us do what we do. We are in our 8th year of Let's Talk Native. I would not be so bold as to suggest that we are a I had Susan Arbetter call me a media king, king of all media in Western New York. That's nice of you to say that. I don't know if she was being sarcastic. I kind of
In Southern Cattaraugus territory?
Media king of the Cattaraugus territory. I don't know. Yeah,
Southern
Cattaraugus. Yeah. So I don't know. But we're doing it, and I know that we have conversations that are meaningful, and I think this one is one, we're not going to button it all up here with a 1-hour show. I'm hoping this conversation is one, because I hear too often people say, you guys can't, you guys aren't really sovereign. And I've heard Native people say, we get an awful lot of money from Indian Health Services. And, yeah, but you're looking at that as if it's charity.
What was that stat that the nation was actually paying out more? Was that during the gaming?
Yeah, especially when they were paying, 120, almost up to $200 million a year to the state of New York. Essentially, what they were paying out was more than they were receiving. So, I mean, clearly the Seneca Nation is in a spot where they could completely operate without, without any outside funds.
And the major thing on that is that the state or whoever was giving the money was actually had control over how we could spend that money.
Well, that's the problem.
If it came in a grant, form of a grant.
Yeah, all these programs, all these grants, all of these grant applications we go through, they create the
control factor.
Yeah, how it has to be administered. I mean, sometimes what you have to spend, when you have to spend, and these are difficult. You're not making a decision based on your actual need of a program. You're basing it to check the box that the state of the federal government putting forward. And I think that's part of the problem. Now, so if the Seneca Nation, again, could be if it were a wash, and you could argue if we, get through this battle with the state over this gaming revenue, and yet you could expand it. You could expand, your economic development because of the things that we talked about, being really able to market your regulatory advantages. I'll give you an example. Even with Seneca Gaming, what would be wrong with the Seneca Nation having gaming machines in their stores, not just in their one stops. In Oneida they do that. In Oneida they have VLTs in their Save On gas stations. Okay, if you go to Vegas, there's a slot machine in every place from the the airport that you pull into to every 7-Eleven. I mean, it's not just scratch offs. But if the Seneca Nation wanted to take gaming to another level, why not compete with what the New York State Lottery is?
I remember in the early days we all played pull tabs everywhere.
There were pull tabs and scratch offs. There were all kinds of and the Seneca Nation could push that, and not just the Seneca Nation, but the Seneca Nation, if they were wiser about developing a better relationship with the private sector. I mean, I could see the smoke shops and gas stations on Seneca territory paying a licensing fee, to have a half a dozen machines in their facilities, and or perhaps the Seneca Nation as some sort of way to have a collective benefit from this kind of gaming, be the supplier of the pull tabs or whatever else. There's no reason that the Seneca Nation can't compete directly against New York State's lottery, especially if they were asserting their sovereignty and doing it. So I mean, and again, I know it sounds like, okay, we're putting more eggs in the same basket, but that's an example. But there's so much that could be done if the regulatory advantages could be marketed in such a way. I mean, obviously housing, we talked, during the break, we talked about this idea of doing these containers and turning these containers not just into homes, but even using these excessive containers, because let's face it, folks, there's not as much stuff leaving the United States as coming in the United States. So there was a surplus of these shipping containers. These are the containers you'll see on the back of a truck. You see them piled up on rail, but you'll also see them on ocean liners coming, bringing all that Walmart stuff in. So if those containers could be gotten and turned, and you can find online, if you look online, you can find any number of sites that have turned shipping containers into homes. But there are some places that's difficult to do because of codes and stuff like that. If the Seneca Nation could advance that issue farther, if they could be pioneers in sustainable living, that's the model that could be created for the world, not just for Indian country, but and that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And I'm not saying right now that there's this strict defined prohibition from the state and the federal government from doing that, but every time we go in a direction, we meet these obstacles from the state and federal government. Hell, even the gas stations. After those went on for a while, all of a sudden we started getting these letters in the mail that talked about the federal standard for above ground and underground storage tanks. Well, I mean, does the EPA, do they have the authority to assert their standards on native territory, or do we have the opportunity to create our own standards that may exceed what the federal government? The whole point is who is governing who. And again, I think IGRA is a perfect example of how an industry was essentially kickstarted again. I mean, we had already done. I mean, we had high stakes bingo and all kinds. We had casinos in some of our territories. There were stores that private sector stores that had slot machines in them. And rather than us really put up the kind of fight that we should have, it was every man for himself. Then this Cabazon thing happens, and the federal government says, "Well, here's a standard by which gaming will be allowed." Wait a second. Why do you have that right to decide that? And and again, our people went along with it because even though there were these federal standards, there was opportunity. And I'm saying, think about what the opportunity would be if those federal standards, if we were able to truly, map out and create our own standards. And some, again, I would argue sometimes that those standards would be higher than what the federal and governments and the state governments have. But I think this is the conversation we need to have. I think we shouldn't be afraid to be sovereign. And I've heard native people say, well,
we got to start talking about what are our steps to reach that? How are we supposed to be taking charge of that? Having our people being the people that are doing it, instead of having to rely on outside agencies to come in here. How
do we, as Ross always says, how do we become the experts?
Yeah.
In these areas that we find not just compelling but necessary. I mean, folks, it's a changing world.
When you first started this topic of what what I was thinking in my mind is like I see the state police and sheriffs patrolling on our territory every day. I mean, it's people say it's good, it's for the safety and all that. But our marshals should be able to do the same thing, and from my understanding, it's the reason that they're here is because they have we don't have the vehicle and traffic laws, and it's not that hard to implement that. I mean, we got the money, resources. I mean, look
what you went through, where an outside agency wants to fine you for something instead of and again.
Yesterday, I was outside working on my car, right, and all of a sudden I heard something screeching right in front of my house. What was it? I thought, what, somebody almost hit a deer? I didn't even see it standing there or what? It was state police. He jammed on the brakes. He did a power U-turn there and took off and went after the guy. But I mean, he's not on a call. I've had a sheriff pull up in front of my house, looking, going by 5 miles an hour, and I'm getting, what the heck's this guy doing? And he said he had a call. And I said, well, where's the marshals? Are you assisting the marshals, or are you just here on your own call? I don't know if he was or not. He didn't provide any proof that he was, that he was on a call.
And we don't have to have that model. And I guess that's my point. I mean, there are examples, and we've seen it a lot now that white people are having serious troubles with drugs, and they're trying to treat the heroin
understand
problem.
That, but they don't have the authority, and that's the thing.
Oh no, I agree with that. I'm saying that if we took more control of what I would call, or I'm not inventing this, and this is a real thing, restorative justice. The idea of, if there is a conflict, how do you resolve the conflict? Not just punish somebody for being right or for being wrong. Not just adjudicating right and wrong and then punishing the wrong. But how do you, if you do something, if somebody does harm to somebody, how do you make them restore that peace and harmony?
I mean, even like you say, not every thing needs a punishment.
Yeah, exactly.
You can come in there, that's what the peace resolve is. You go in there and you talk to the guys, you straighten things out. Nobody has to get cuffed and stuffed and, getting charged with anything.
Or if in Donald Trump's world, nobody has to have their head smashed in the top.
Put your hand on their head.
Don't treat perps nicely.
Yeah.
You got to smash their heads and and this is, but. And there's a reason that we should take a more of an active stance on this stuff. I'm not saying that this should be a haven for criminal activity because there's no cops here.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
No, but the question is how, what are the steps that we should take? Part of it comes down to what we talk about all the time, about caring more and making sure that the children and women and the most vulnerable people in our communities, elderly, are not left, to be preyed upon by, frankly, even family members for that matter.
Because like what you said, it's not just our officers enforcing New York State or county law or whatever. We shouldn't be just that branch of them.
And that's what happened in Akwesasne. I just saw Akwesasne. There was an article.
I've seen you commenting about that. About whose laws are they enforcing?
They're clearly enforcing state law.
Yeah.
They are state officers. But they get to have a Hiawatha belt on their shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we need to do better than that. And utilizing our distinct territories as a place to prove out better systems of not just of governance or of justice, but lifestyle. That's what I'm saying. We can do some things in our territory that are difficult. I'm not saying that they can't happen off our territories, but if we prove them out on our territories, because our sovereignty is recognized and respected. And frankly, you might see the state and federal government saying, let's keep an eye on these guys. Let's look at what they're doing, because they may be doing something. We don't want to have any blame or any culpability if it goes wrong. But if they're doing something that goes right, we may want to pay attention to that.
In the end, what we're really striving for is a better quality of life.
All of us are.
Yeah.
I mean, really, all people are. And so my point is, if we could take some steps towards that improvement in our quality of life, regardless of what the state regs are, regardless of who claims to be controlling who, again, I think we could be the model that other communities, other nations could follow.
Because quite frankly, American society is really taking a bad turn.
Yeah.
I mean, look at their policing system. They're judge and executioner right there. Without
permission from the president,
without any adjudication.
Yeah, and without any checks and balances, without anybody saying, it's this whole thing. Are police officers law enforcement agencies? Really? Or are they, again, are they public servants? Are they there to serve and protect, or are they? Most of these cops don't even understand what the laws are. Honestly, they don't, and it's a lot. You see that
all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot for them to take in. The main thing is that they should be, part of they should be conflict resolution artists, experts, and they should be able to document. They should be good at documenting all of the information, and let the experts in law figure that out. Even in that system, but that's not the way it's going. When you got the president of the United States saying, you arrest somebody, don't be so nice, smash their heads if you need to. Here they just murdered somebody. No, you didn't determine they were just murdered somebody. You just accused somebody of that. I mean, granted, I understand that there's circumstances where or people are caught red-handed doing something, but you can't have the police. Doling out punishment like you see them doing with tasers and with with nightsticks and beating people, and that has got to be a stop put to that. And so when I see the St. Regis Tribal Police being getting some sort of permanent designation from the governor of the state of New York, I'm thinking, I'm really thrilled about that.
Even in that case, how can he author or grant that authority?
I don't know.
Why they're waiting for that just for the New York State? Oh, we're good now. I mean, it's the same with the marijuana deal. I've already the cannabis and hemp. All right, we're waiting for New York State to say that it's okay and be legalized in New York State. And I think that what Tyndonega is doing is good for the medical purposes. But still, I want to see hemp. I want to see hemp growing in fields, and then having our industry take off from creating all of those products from
and hemp is a perfect example in just what I'm talking about, because it is prohibited outside in the rest of the state for the most part. I mean, it is not an industry in the United States, and to the extent that it is very, very controlled. But if on native territories we created that hemp industry, not just the agricultural side, but the cottage industries that go with it, in producing everything from hemp wool to the clothing to fiber boards to cordage, all of that stuff. Of course, there's oils and there's medicinal. Products. There's all kinds of stuff that could come from this. So if the regulatory systems out there prohibit it, why couldn't we demonstrate on our territories, again, because we are sovereign, the ability to take an industry like that, not because of recreational use or even, frankly, even the medical use, I think.
What is the recreational use of hemp?
What do you mean? Smoking it or throwing a football made of hemp fiber?
Making a football with it or a baseball or whatever. But you can't. There is no.
There is no recreational use for hemp other than
drug use.
Other than making maybe football uniforms.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. There's no reason that we can't be growing hemp, because people are going to realize you can smoke a bale of this stuff and it's not going to. It's not going to do anything for you as far as a high or anything.
Yeah.
So that's not, people are worried about security. Oh, what about the security of it? Well, go ahead, take a couple bundles of it. You're not going to do nothing for you.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that
weave
smoking,
your own hat or something. I don't know.
Yeah, do what you're going to do. But I mean, I think that hemp is a good example of this stuff. Of what I'm suggesting, a way to to push this envelope, but again. Anybody who's going to do it and going to make that investment knows that they're taking a chance. I mean, and to be clear, Alex Whiteplume in Lakota territory grew a field of hemp, harvested it. In the second year when he went to put in another field of hemp, the DEA came in and burnt it, destroyed the crop. Now, I know that Alex and others are pushing this again, Deborah and others. But more of us should be pushing this issue. But again, who is willing to take these fights on? And I'm saying this is what we need to do in our territories. We need to identify, obviously not just very, very lucrative industries, but even some of the industries that are more marginal. That would become more profitable if we did them on our territories. But there's also, like I said, when I talk about that brain trust leaving areas, if we had better relationships with the universities. So the first time we hear that a university is looking at taking some technology that they developed to India, and we say, what can we do? What can we do to convince you to do it here? And again, beyond the geography issues, there's also things that we should be able to do to attract investment. So again, where does sovereignty come in there? Well, think about somebody being able to invest in our territories without having the same kind of tax implications. If our sovereignty were truly respected, by state and federal governments, we would have a booming economy on our territories, because there's any number of things that we could do. Everything from tax-free bonds to investments that again, what happens on our territories can stay on our territories, and how people deal with the proceeds for that as when they leave our territories and go into their bank accounts. That's between them and their gods, I guess. But there are ways that we could do some things on our territories that create opportunities even for non-natives. Because seeing what the potential is in our territory, and I'm not saying that we exploit it to the point that we sell out, every aspect and every acre of our lands. I'm not saying that at all. I think we have to be very discriminating in what we do in terms of developing economy. But and for me, I wish that we had a higher standard. And I'm not going to condemn gas, gaming, and cigarettes, but that's not the legacy that I wish for any of our territories.
You were asking before, what would we wish for? And I think it'd be very important for us to receive, or to basically receive, but also to give the understanding of our culture, okay? The understanding of the culture would be helping people to understand the community and all those, ask those questions, okay? And I think that's very important, because it would help people to identify as Haudenosaunee, as Ongwewe, instead of just basically self-destructive.
Yeah.
And I think that's important.
No, I think the whole idea of sharing our culture and our understanding and educating not just ourselves but others creates an opportunity. It creates an opportunity for a different school of thought. It creates the opportunity for writers to have a different perspective in what they write about. For filmmakers. I mean, obviously providing an atmosphere that is more economical. How many times have you heard about somebody who shot a film in Canada because it was cheaper than doing it in the United States? I mean, you hear about. I mean, right back to I think I remember hearing that The Wizard of Oz was even shot in Canada because it the original one. Even way back then, some of the outside scenes, and it's like, well, I mean, how do you? I mean. So not only am I saying that our territories could be, we could carve out areas of our community to provide for artistic, industries as well, but I think people who would grow to understand what our culture was more about may see some inspiration in terms of what some of the artistic industry might look like, in terms of theater, in terms of writing, in terms of music, all of that stuff. Looking at what we've done here, throwing a small studio together for our show here. I think about the Seneca Nation being the home of the Native American Music Awards. How great would it be if the Seneca Nation developed all of the state-of-the-art equipment for artists to come in and record?
And it could be so that it's not just once a year.
Yeah,
it could be done every month or whatever.
Well, it could be something. It says, we're going to go up to Niagara Falls. We're going to go to Cattaraugus. We're going to go to Allegheny. We're going to go. We're going to tap into some of the music expertise that exists in some of these areas, and we're going to go record something. Maybe we'll even go perform over at the casino. I mean, there is an opportunity to create an industry out of the music industry also. I mean, when you think about Nashville or Memphis or Austin, Texas, I mean, they didn't have some exclusive right to become the music centers that they did. So these are areas, if you consider the fact that we may have some regulatory advantages, it may be a cheaper place for somebody to do some recording. And then certainly for Native people who perhaps aren't going to have record contracts. Right. That need to have the state-of-the-art equipment and the state-of-the-art facility, and it's that whole thing of developing our own place in media, theater, film, television, radio, the internet, all of that stuff. These are things that we could do on our territories that are sometimes difficult and prohibitive to do off our territories. And because we do have the resources, I mean, obviously there's gaming dollars and other things, there are ways that we could diversify in ways that other people would have difficulty in doing. So when you ask, be careful what you wish for, I say no. Stop being careful. Start wishing. Start hoping. Start dreaming about what our territories could be. And let's take on the fight. Let's fight the state. I mean, I'm up for a challenge with a battle with Andrew Cuomo or Donald Trump or anybody else. We have to understand. And Matt, you mentioned it earlier. I mean, you look at the what's happening in the United States. Things are not going well. There's a lot that's unraveling, and I've said it before. Beyond the political, chaos, some of the social chaos associated with things like, arbitrary justice, Black Lives Matter, police abuse, all of that stuff. Beyond, the degraded education systems that exist in the United States. I mean, the United States isn't even they're not in the top 30, I don't think, in terms of education worldwide. So when you consider all of these things, and then you look at the potential for economic chaos and climate chaos, man, I'll tell you, we can't. There's not a whole lot we're going to do here in the Seneca Nation to stop climate change. But you know what? We could insulate and isolate ourselves from some of the adverse effects of the outside politics, the outside social decay, and and certainly the economic. Look, I know right now Seneca Nation depends a lot on gaming dollars, which is disposable income, which it's not recession proof, folks. Mm-hmm. Which is all the more reason that we should be developing diversified economies, and we should do so with the expressed purpose of advancing our sovereignty.
And how do we create that environment for improving quality of life for our people? And how can it, like you said, how can it be the model to go around to other communities? And
I think some of it goes back to education, and this is obviously the thing that you talk about all the time. I think if we don't educate our young people to how it is and what it is that makes us distinct, it's not enough to just say, okay, you're Seneca. In fact, that might even be the best word to use. Whatever you're going to use. But then to explain, look, we've pushed back against the state. Let's look at some of the battles that we've had and how we've turned the corner on certain things. I think we need to understand that, no, we have something that's worth fighting for.
And I think it has to be understood what education is compared to indoctrination. Well,
and again, important. If you're only educating to the American standard of business, I mean, because let's face it, the way I've heard universities saying over and over, we need to prepare our young people for the global economy, and I say bullshit. I think the global economy is the problem. What we do locally is going to secure our futures far more than trying to create some sort of presence in the lie that is the global economy. Look, I hope people listen to the show, and even if you're hearing what we're saying here, you have your own thoughts, and I'd love to see your comments on the post as we post this in various ways, whether it's the Facebook stream or whether it's the SoundCloud post or whether it's our YouTube channel. I'd like to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and we'll bring them up and we'll talk about it more in the future. Thanks again for listening. Hey, look, I'm not in New York this week, but maybe Jake and I will put a video out this week, and we'll see what that looks like, and see maybe it'll be our first non-LTN show video, and maybe we'll do that this week, and of course we'll be back here on Friday. Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Yahweh.
Yeah.